Ferments are interesting enough. They're new flavours you're developing anyway, but then add natives to that and you've got natives and ferments, and then put a bit of Japanese at it and you're actually doing things that have never been done before.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Being born into a long line of hospitality professionals almost makes your career choice somewhat inevitable. As much as some may try, the lure of food, wine, and forming amazing connections with people is often too strong to ignore. Rohan Park is the executive chef of Old Young's Kitchen in Western Australia. Rohan, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to have you on the show. You've got a family that's been in the food game, and here you are as well. Was sort of that always on the cards for you?
Inevitable is the word you use. No, it wasn't on the cards. I went into it kicking and screaming, Huck. To be really honest, I did my school years. I schooled all over the place, which sort of came around full circle later, and we'll get to that. But I did my school years. I did 3 years in the Kimberley in Kununurra, 3 years in the Kimberley in Broome, and a few years down in the southwest of Australia. The rest of it was in Perth. So got to move around a lot. But my mum was a food scientist. My mum's, rest in peace, my grandma, she was a cooking lecturer for many years. And her father, so my great-grandfather, was a pastry chef. So in that alone, the literature and some of the stuff, I've got moolies from 1930, tongue presses and flour mills from the 30s, and all of his literature is priceless. I can never even read it all. I didn't even know they could print colour pictures in the 1930s, let alone some of the pictures they've got of the cakes and stuff he used to make in these books. That was back when they were bakers and confectioners, they were called. It was totally different to chefing. But look, I tried as hard as I could to stay out of it. I did all of the top tier of schooling to be an engineer, but I'm far too creative for that. So I spent a few years, having some fun in my 20s, and then had a flick at viticulture. I was earning 120 grand in mining. And it's taken me about 25 years to catch back up to that. But I was earning 120 grand as a 21-year-old in mining. And you know what my girlfriend at the time, that was back in, 2004. We were going out to degustations at restaurants. Perth people will know them like Fraser's and Gala. Back when they were first starting and no one knew what a dego was. Spending all my money on that and Le Creuset pans and Woolstoff knives, and really it was still just sort of simmering away in the background, but I didn't realise it. And then I had quite a bad injury in the mines, so I got out and living in the southwest at that point, I got into viticulture. Not as a viticulturalist, but obviously just working around all of the wineries, doing the pruning and the canopy management and such. And just being in these epic wineries like Lewin and Wills Domain and all these places working on the vines, and I sort of just started niggling away at me like, geez, I'm in this amazing area. Why don't I try and get into it? So, I guess I called Three Oceans Winery. The guy that gave me my first chance, Richard Burns, shout out. I called him, said, look, I'm happy to come and be your kitchen hand. I'll peel potatoes. I'll do whatever you need. What you think about when you see all the old chef movies and stuff is, you're going to be peeling potatoes and burning yourself. And just worked my way up from there, and the rest was history, as they say, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I want to explore sort of some of your influences and where you've worked along the way, but this family history is fascinating. Tell us a little bit about it. What was it like sort of when you've reached back and explored sort of your family's history? What were some of the things you found?
I'm really glad you asked. Growing up, it just seemed normal for me, but every Christmas, my grandfather, also rest in peace, he'd print out on the typewriter an individualised menu for everyone with their name written in his calligraphy, like a set menu. And I shit you not, forgive my French, but it was just normal to me back then as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old. My earliest memories of this and saying, what does horse do? What does this mean? And he says hors d'oeuvres, then aperitifs, and then first course, and then second course, and then third course. He hand wrote a tasting menu in the 80s for all of the family every single year, and he did it for the anniversary. The kids all got to go away and stay with their friends, or they got locked in their rooms. But he did that for my parents and my mum and her siblings. They did that for their anniversary every year as well, and that's partially because my grandfather was very high in the Freemasons. All right, so the people think a lot about the Freemasons, that they're very all creepy and stuff, but they're a bunch of businessmen that cook for each other once a month. They take turns cooking and they have a big dinner party. I mean, that's as much as I'm allowed to know anyway. But without him being in the culinary world, they still had dinner parties, and he knew about the tuxedo and the format of a tasting menu. And my grandmother had all of the sort of the nuts and the bolts in the cooking and the making it actually happen. So that was just normal to me. I just grew up around it, and then it was only in my 20s, and when I sort of got there, it's like, wow, okay, so that hearing about degustations, and all of my friends in the southwest were working at all these wineries, Lewin Estate, Cape Lodge, Wilstone, Maine, all this sort of stuff. Everything's full circle.
What sort of feasts or dishes do you remember from these sort of celebrations from when you were young?
I mean, it sounds plain Jane, but I still look back with fondness. He'd always have pigs in blankets sort of thing, devils on horseback. But then we'd roll into the salmon with the capers and the lemon and the iceberg lettuce and a whole egg mayonnaise. Just really straightforward stuff, and then moving on to some turkeys and hams. There's always a turkey and a ham. There's always sparkling burgundy. I've known sparkling burgundy since I was very young. And then rolling into the brandy sauce on the Christmas pudding. Everything had to be perfect, and everything was a ritual. And without knowing, that was Escoffier's brigade system being drilled into me as a toddler.
You mentioned your time in the mines there and earning an incredible amount of money for a young person, but you had an injury. Tell us about that period of time. Was that difficult, that transition, not only the injury, but a reduced income in a different way, or a different path forward?
100%, Huck. I mean, I was earning a lot of money, but I was sitting in front of 14 computer screens and 2 radios telling people to turn belts on and motors off and start up the mill and get the sparkies in. It was mind-numbingly boring. I could have built a couple of houses and sat there quite comfortably as quite a wealthy man at the moment if I'd stuck with it. But without knowing at the time without knowing I was a creative, it just nothing fed my passion, and I didn't know what my passion was. It was still below the surface. So then having the injury, I got quite a large payout, but I didn't want to go back to the mines anymore. It was like a second chance. It was something I could do to build myself up, and that helped fund, I guess, in a small way, my entry into the industry. But I moved very fast up from that kitchen hand job. I was on the ladder within a month. Within a year, I was ready to move on. I was first year apprentice and the senior sous chef at the same time at Flute's restaurant, which at the time was a Gold Plate Award winning restaurant under Francoise Morvan, shout out. I guess it was from being at that sort of level of money that I took for granted and then going into an adult apprenticeship, I really just clawed my way up as fast as I humanly could to get as far as I could. I guess it was, I just strived. I strived hard.
What were some of the real key sort of people and venues that you worked with while you were sort of building your career as a chef?
Richard Burns is always in the back of my head. I started at Three Oceans Winery with him. We're a humble sort of winery cafe there, and I sort of cut my teeth and got my nuts and bolts there and moved on quite quickly. Flutes was high pressure. I was running the pass as a first-year apprentice at that stage. I'd only been in the game for a year and a half. Flutes was high pressure. We were doing 200 for lunch and then weddings on the weekend as well. But he had faith in me and just threw me in the deep end. And I mean, duck on water. I don't know how much of the duck above the water was there, but the legs were paddling underneath. But I didn't drown, okay? I'm still here, I know. So definitely shout outs to Francois Morvan. Then after qualifying, I went to a place called Brookwood that I spent a lot of time at. Brookwood is a winery, is still a winery. But we did tapas. A chef of mine, Avon, who worked under Russell Blakey, we did a lot of tapas and charcuterie sort of stuff, which got me to hone in a little bit more on that. And then at that point, I was living in a farmhouse on a winery which had no power bills and an electric stovetop. So I had jus and tonkotsu broths, and that stovetop just was never turned off. I had pots bubbling away for about 2 years there, just extracurricular, just training myself at home because I wanted to do Japanese. I was classically trained in French, but I wanted to learn my Japanese as much as I could. So there was always pigs, trotters and stuff bubbling away at home. But Brookwood were really good. They let us run with it. They gave us a bit of technology. That's where I stepped into sous vide and a bit more of technique level cooking. And after a few years of that, I was going walking with my dog. I lived in Quaremup, right next to Howard Park, with beautiful bushes and stuff around. So I started playing around with flowers and learning about my flowers from the Department of Agriculture as to what's legal, what's not legal, what's edible, what I'm allowed to do with it as far as giving it to people commercially, whereas in it's a gift on the plate. But that's where I really started learning about foraging. And it was through my apprenticeship. I have to shout out Amanda Smith that everybody in the game over here knows Amanda Smith. She's the best lecturer out there at Margaret River TAFE. And she got in one day. She got in Paul Yoda Iskov, who you may or may not have heard of. I personally believe he's one of the best chefs in Australia. We're talking Dom, we're talking Pujol, we're talking Noma, a long time at Viedemond, but also a lot of time as one of the senior chefs at Amise, which is an institution over here. So he came in one day and gave us a run on what's around the area as far as native things are concerned, and got us all to put up a dish, and I put out the best thing I possibly could and kind of impressed him a bit. And a year later just called him and sort of said, look, I'm only working 3 days a week. Do you have much going on with you? And he said, look, actually, I don't really have any chefs at the moment. I'd love you to spend some time over here and I can teach you some stuff. And that turned into a 3-month stage and turned into the next 3.5 years of my life after that stage. So a lot of people in Australia don't even know what a stage is, let alone can understand why someone would work for 3 months as a stage. But I still had enough money left to support myself minimally as an income. And if you know anything about Ferva and Paul and Yoda, is we're travelling every week. So, we're always on the road. It is a lot of hours, but we're always on the road. So your accommodation's sorted, your food and your drinks sorted. So there wasn't much income needed for me to be able to support that stage status. And then I guess that next 3.5 years is what I always like to call my second apprenticeship. There was nothing but everything was native, apart from dairy, eggs, flour, onions and carrots for stock. Everything was native apart from that raw staples. So that's where my whole game completely changed.
What did you learn about native ingredients during that time?
Just the versatility, but also what's toxic, what's bad, what's good, what needs to be treated in a particular way. Paul spent a lot of time in Noma, so I really learnt the Scandinavian way of cooking in that we just cook in water and then let the product shine. if we pickle something, we can only get native radishes, the Yulks, the Ravensthorpe radish, once a year, but we get 10 kilos of it from the ladies. We always get it from the ladies who forage it for us, and we'll have Yulk all year because we'll pickle it in nothing but white vinegar and water. No cloves and bay leaves and stuff, because I just want it to taste like Yulk. So I learned a lot about paring back, a lot about letting ingredients shine and not so much having to throw different flavors at things just to use them as a vessel for flavor, but actually letting that ingredient be the flavor on the dish. And what a big one was that I really learned was balancing on the dish. Native ingredients are so interesting that they're either salty or astringent or bitter, or they're really, really sour. It's not like you've got sweet and umami and stuff. You've got actually all these, what a lot of people would say are negative attributes, but when you've balanced them all on the plate, something salty makes something bitter sweet, and then you've got something sour on the other side, and it's actually using the elements on the plate themselves to season the dish and balance it rather than balancing each individual component. And that was a mind blow for me, and it's changed my whole ethos and the whole way I cook in the future since then.
You mentioned your fascination with Japanese techniques and cuisine. Tell us about Fleur Restaurant and how it came about. It ended up winning a Best New Restaurant and Restaurant of the Year and a lot of accolades. Tell us a bit about the restaurant.
Well, just jump back, but also jump forward. It's the Japanese techniques. Is what I also took from Yoda was ferments. He had the Noma Book of Ferments before the Noma Book of Ferments was a thing. So I was very, very lucky to learn a lot about ferments. Okay, so I have so many misos and soys and shoyus and garums that just I'd sit here for hours just talking about the ferments alone, Huck. But it's hard to. I did 3.5 years of learning bits and pieces in the start and the end and the middle, and it was when I finally left and moved to Perth for my family that I started doing ferments from the beginning to the end myself and really, really found my groove with that. And I guess that's where I'm valuable, and I was found as a chef, I guess, by Fleur, you could say, was to give that magic element, which is the native and the ferment. So, ferments are interesting enough, then your flavors you're developing anyway, but then add natives to that, and you've got natives and ferments, and then put a bit of Japanese at it, and you're actually doing things, which is very rare, Huck. You're actually doing things that have never been done before. I remember in my 20s, a few too many drinks deep, coming up with some crazy dish at home and then going, wow, look at this, I bet no one else has done that, and then Googling the ingredients and seeing it's been done 20 or 30 times, It's actually a very rare thing, and I've been able to achieve that in the last few years, is to do things that have never been done before.
Can you give us an example or two of a dish that you had on the menu at Fleur that sort of exemplified what you were doing there?
100%. West Australian native marron with a lemon myrtle, fresh lemon myrtle, and split pea 6-month miso, but then in a normal dashi broth, like a nice dashi broth or a fermented tomato dashi broth, and then a Jerusalem crumb from Jerusalem artichoke waste. You've got a miso broth essentially, but that miso broth is flavoured with fermented lemon myrtle leaves also, and then marron that's come from Western Australia. It's endemic to nowhere else in the world. It's that type of shellfish. So I know that hasn't been done. Unless somebody's got all of that gear in and taken it to Japan and then spent 6 months making that miso. I'm fairly confident, I have to say, Huck. Let's not say no, it's never been done. But yeah.
Tell us about Old Young's kitchen. Obviously, it's a distillery as well. How did that job come about, and tell us a bit about it?
First and foremost, it's another further thing. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Six Seasons gin. So the Six Seasons gin is one of our gins that's got desert lime in there. It's got lemon myrtle. It's got a little bit of gelatin wax in there, but sea celery. But that was curated with Yoda and Dale Tilbrook, our local elder, Auntie Dale, shout out. And they came over here and they without me, obviously, they came and curated that gin, and that's always been one of the feature gins that's on the menu now. But we'd use that as our welcome drink. So every week I came up to see my partner when my child was being born. I came up from the southwest and saw her, and I'd have to pop through and grab a couple of cases of gin just to keep the welcome drinks party going. So then just at the serendipitous right time, James Young, our founder, he called me at the right time, in the right place, when I was sort of ready to get out of the city and start focusing on family and having a tree change, which I only just heard is even a thing. But having a tree change and getting away from so many nights and sort of working on hospitality 2.0, if you will, where everyone's happy, family, getting away from all those old negative things we don't even like to talk about but should talk about. I was approached by James Young to take on the exec chef role, working with Old Young's amazing gins and vodkas here in the Swan Valley. So obviously with my partner, being the food ambassador for the whole region, I never saw myself making it out here because there's never been a huge reputation for incredible food in the Swan Valley. It's always been a lot of taste, charcuterie boards, ploughman's boards, if you will, pizzas and palmies. So, yeah, I gave it a crack and I jumped in, and look, a year down the track, I'm amazed that I still haven't been watered down, and the punters are coming in and they're being blown away with all these native and ferment and international flavours.
Well, give us a sense of what you're doing there and the connection that you've got with the local producers. What's some dishes that you can tell us about and the connections that you're making?
Well, the scallop crudo, I guess. I mean, we've got a milk kefir down. My partner makes milk kefir at home. I originally did about 4 years ago, but she took that over. My son has that every day. We've got native lemongrass oil. The native lemongrass I purchased from some of the mob that I met at Twin Lakes, the Nyul mob, shout out, up north on the Dampier Peninsula. But I also grow my own native lemongrass, so I use 2 strains. Mark from Tuckerbush, there's a company over here called Tuckerbush. He has an Indigenous partner. I got Mark in to curate the gardens when we were building this restaurant. So I have a lot of my aromats growing in the garden here. Obviously, they're still not quite flourishing yet because we haven't gone through a full 4 seasons or 6 seasons if you to go by the Noongar calendar. But I've got lots growing at home because it's my passion. So I've got enough between home and here, and then literally a stone's throw away, I'd say 75 metres if you can throw a stone that far, I have Marlin Up Galleries, and that's Arnie Dale Tilbrook. So she's a traditional owner and an elder, and she, I guess, is a middleman in a way that my bush tomatoes come directly from the ladies in South Australia. They harvest when they're ready to be harvested and send them to Dale. Dale harvests and is in connection with other mobs who harvest and send to Dale. So anybody else, I mean, I'm very lucky in that I get first pick. I get something that's not been on the shelf for 3 years, like a lot of other major suppliers. I mean, everybody's sprouting all this stuff and they've got all this gear, but it's dead, it's trash. It's been sitting there for 3 years, and it's had a 300% markup put on it, and that markup's not going back to the ladies. So I take a lot of pride and passion in knowing that I'm getting the money right back into the hands that are growing the plants. Do you know what I mean? Right back into the land where it's coming from. It'd be easy for me to pay a lot more and get it from one of the big suppliers, but I do go out of my way, and it takes me a little bit more effort and a lot more time. But I won't apologise for that, and I won't change that ever.
You mentioned Arnie Dale a few times. Tell us a bit about her and the relationship that you have.
Well, Dale watched my partner grow up as a kid in the Swan Valley, but I never met Dale until I started working with Paul at Fervour, and I guess it's just extended family now. I know her granddaughters. She knows my son. She's known my partner from when she was knee-high to a grasshopper, for lack of a better euphemism. And that's what I say. It takes more time. If I go and load up on some stuff, I'm down there for hours because we're just talking about culture. I'm talking about artwork. She's got a gallery. I can't get out. It's like when I go, rest in peace, go and visit my grandparents. You know, you had going for a 5-minute cup of tea, but it's a 3-hour yarn. And then you get out to the car and it's another 15-20 minutes yarning at the car. Do you know what I mean? It's like family. Yeah. It's perfect. It's just like family.
As you mentioned, Old Young's is a distillery with gin and vodka in the Swan Valley. Does it speak to you in regards to the menu? Does it influence your dish creation? Is there matchings? How do you work together?
Well, we started. I was here July last year, and we weren't open until November. James Young, our founder, he gave myself. I was the first one on board as the exec chef. A bottle of each of the gins to practice cooking with. I'll be honest with you, apart from our vodka sugo, I don't actually have any gin in any of my cooking at all, Huck. I've got access to all of these amazing native and non-native and European botanicals that I use in my cooking, so the food speaks with the gin. Apart from a Gravlax or something like that, I almost feel it's lazy and wasteful to just pour liquor at food, where instead I can go and get the spent botanicals from the distillery behind me, which I'm lucky enough to have, and I use those to smoke a risotto. The spent botanicals go into a crumb that's served with a berry dish. So the berry dish in itself is a perfect example. The spent botanicals I grind up and dry, they go into flavour a crumb. There's so much flavour left in it, okay? Then an old Kwa recipe, it's a frozen meringue that goes down and gets burnt on the plate, and some blueberries that are pickled with juniper, Tuscan juniper, because we are the only distillery in Australia that uses actual Tuscan juniper, because our founder, he went over to Europe and just haggled until he could get some of the allocation that the big boys, the beef eaters, the Tanquerays, they've all got their hands all over it, okay? So we're the only people who use it. So I pickle those blueberries in nothing but white vinegar, water, and Tuscan juniper. But blueberries and strawberries, berries in general themselves, are probably one of the oldest pairings for gin known. So yeah, finish that with a little bit of berry sorbet and go over the top with some lemon myrtle, some fresh dried lemon myrtle from my partner's on the other side of the river, just in the valley from my partner's mum's house. And all of those things, cut Tuscan junipers in all of our gins, you know, the lemon myrtles in 2 of our gins, but then also just using things that I know pair, and then wherever I can. So the risotto that I smoke, that's a vegan dish, I smoke it with the botanicals. The botanicals are used in that dish in the spent botanical crumb, but they're also used to brine our swordfish on another one of our crudo dishes, just to flavour the brine. I try and use it as a challenge to use any botanicals in any form, spent or fresh, to make the booze sing. Because first and foremost, we're a booze company. We're a brand-driven company that's about booze, because the booze is so amazing. And I like to take that as a challenge and to create dishes that are as good as the booze that we're serving.
You mentioned that the region is sort of renowned for charcuterie boards and cheese boards, and not so much sort of what you're doing. Take us through the experience. What can people expect if they come through the doors there for lunch?
I mean, I've tried to keep the demographic open, but I've used technique where I can use technique. I've used technique across the board, but I've tried to keep it accessible, okay? So you can come in and as an a la carte patron and get some olives and sourdough. You can get some hamon croquettes in a vodka sugo with some 6-month manchego. But I mean, those themselves, I'm using hamon, I'm using San Marzano Pomodoro tomatoes and a 6-month manchego, not a 3-month manchego. So still, it's a simple thing, but I'm still using the best that I can use to get that out there. And then you can finish with a beef shoulder with an anise myrtle, carrot puree, some purple cauliflower and a jus. Or you can come in and say, look, just feed me, and you get the tasting menu. And if you come in today, you'd be getting warm olives. They're from the south. So I've got those olives. We used to use them in all the restaurants down south, and a lot of the big boys use them in the restaurants up here, without saying any names, but definitely a lot of the big restaurants. But the difference is I use the olive oil that's actually pressed from those olives to marinate the olives in, instead of using some cheaper oil to do that. It costs me a little bit more, but I think it's worth it. So if you came in and let me feed you today, I'd be giving you olives and spent sourdough. So the spent grains from Blaster Brewing's brewing process, I use their spent grain waste to make a sourdough, and then a shio koji butter. So a lot of people do shio koji, but it is a fantastic product, but I do actually make that in-house and then flavour the butter with it. I guess that's where you talk about compromise, is I know that I don't have the room or the time with the covers that we're doing here. I can't make butter here. I'd love to make butter here. It's one of my passions, but I can't make butter here. But I use unsalted, uncultured, plain butter. But then the shio koji that I ferment for 5 weeks rather than the normal Japanese 1 week, the butter's just a vessel for all that flavour, and it's essentially now a cultured butter with nuttiness, saltiness, sweetness, and a buttload of umami, all right? So I guess that's where I say I use technique where I can, and then I just play my cards safe. So you'd get your sourdough and your olives, then you'd step into a bit of a seafood orientated dish with some scallops, fermented green mangoes, a lacto fermented green mango, milk kefir, fermented in-house as well, and a boise boudin of native lemongrass, pepperberry wattle seed fermented paste, and some Geraldton wax vinegar. So that, I mean, to read it out, I mean, it's very simple on the menu. I try to keep the menu quite accessible, because if I tell you that on the menu, nobody knows what I'm talking about. But it's just, I guess, to tell you that you get some swordfish dish with it. Then you get a kangaroo tartare with emu egg yolk and crocodile garum. So you're getting both of our national animals, and you're getting a crocodile garum on the side, with some yesterday's bread, shout outs Joe Barrett, cracker on the side, with some crocodile chorizo and a black garlic aioli dusted with wild rosella powder. Then you'll go into some mains and perhaps a dessert. So I won't get too far into that one. So I guess that's where I say is I was a bit apprehensive as to how this would all go. It does sound like, I mean, I'll read this one out to you. Gnocchi, pumpkin, kelp, coconut, saltbush, grana padano. So that's Italian, right? But it's with a wakame puree and coconut milk and grana padano, and it's garnished with saltbush. And the side, if you were to choose it, that comes with that is steamed greens, which is your choy sum or your kangkong, with macadamia and a black bean exo. So I'm just really, really lucky, and touch wood, I can keep rolling with it, but there is zero pigeonholing whatsoever. I couldn't even tell you what the cuisine is here. I know a lot of people will jump to say modern Australian, but that's something I don't like to have come out of my mouth. It's just yummy food, and I'm lucky. So I can use all these different cuisines. I'm not pigeonholed to only native, but I'm not pigeonholed to Japanese and just doing a ferment-driven menu. I could just put out whatever I want, which is really rare these days.
You're exploring and celebrating native and local ingredients and really putting your voice on the plate. What do you love about what you do?
Just cooking in itself to me is so many things. I mean, first and foremost, it's a career. Okay, it puts money on the table. It keeps my kid fed, and keeps my wife from leaving me. But beyond that, it's a creative outlet. And I found this out during COVID when the first big COVID lockdown happened. Is I was cooking so much. I was organising my dry store like a madman into international regions and pastry and all of this sort of stuff. I was organising my pantry like it was a dry store at work, because cooking's a coping mechanism as well at times. It's a love and a passion and a hobby. It's all those things at once, but the real nuts and bolts, I guess I'd say it's feeding my family. It's a bare necessity. But at the same time, on a whole broader perspective, feeding your whole extended family, it's celebration, it's bringing loved ones together, and on a really raw level, it's just the basics of love and family and relation. And going full circle, I was instilled with that, with what we were talking about at the start of the conversation. It's all I've ever known, is that level of dining, I guess, and family celebration.
Well, Rohan, congratulations on what you're creating over there in WA. It's an honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks so much, Huck. I really appreciate it, huh?
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.